So it's last time I did one about we've got to start right here because in order to get out there, get people in, get people to join the Christian faith, they've actually got to be talked to by one of us. It just doesn't normally happen automatically. It does sometimes. I mean, God's in control. But sometimes we go out there, we just plant the seed, and we let them do their thing. But we got to get out there and start planting. So this one here is like a second part of that. It's about trusting in Jesus when it doesn't make sense. Call it get out of the boat. So, wow. Again, that's not set up right. Yeah, I need to get away from the speakers. So, there you go. That way? Oh, see, now I'm being told get away. But then I'll trip. I'm worried about tripping on this thing. That's a little too much. I'll trip. There we go. And I'm going to trip on this, and I'm old enough I might fall and break a hip. So I actually have to read the paper that I brought because that's messed up. So this of course is Matthew 14:22 to 33. We know why. We know about it. We all know the story where he gets out, and Peter gets out and then walks towards Jesus. Could you imagine doing that? I mean, that was actually quite ingenious to say, "Hey, let me come out with you." Nobody else in the boat did it. Me, I'm a little guy. I'd be glad I can hide in the back behind everybody else so no one will see me. I ain't going out there. I barely know how to swim. No, I know how to swim. Anyways, so immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. After he had dismissed the crowds, he went to the mountains by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, and for the wind was against them. Early in the morning, he came walking out towards the sea. Can we turn this down just a little bit, see if that helps with the squeaking? Are you all the way down? Yeah, but they don't. It's totally from the system. But then everybody really hears me. And I don't like that. So, in the early morning, Jesus came walking out towards them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. They said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. Now that reminds me of Scooby-Doo. All they need is a Great Dane and some beatnik in the back, eating all the Scooby snacks. But Jesus immediately spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water, and he came towards Jesus. What happened here? Anybody know? Yeah, so he was out there. Was he kicking at the fish? What happened? You know what happened? What happened? Oh, did they do some fancy handshake or something? So what happened was he noticed the strong wind. He became frightened and was beginning to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." We've all been there. I've done that, right? Have you? Jesus immediately reached out his hand, caught him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." That's important. He took his eyes off Jesus. He started looking at the situation around. We all do that. The song Casting Crowns, Praise You in the Storm, actually has kind of a hint about that. Keep your eyes on Jesus through the storm. Don't be looking at the storm, because then you'll get distraught and scared and upset. And you'll forget why God's there. Huh? No. Yeah, I'm just looking at you because you're closest. That teaches you to sit by your husband. So, let's see if I can read the rest of them. Okay. So, the boat was safe, but it wasn't storm-free. And, of course, I'm not going to read that again because it's a long one. But they were in the middle of God's will when they got hit by a storm. So God told them what to do. They were doing it, and a storm still hit. So we don't just have this free ride like, hey, I'm going to follow Jesus and everything's going to happen all peachy keen and smiley. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're doing God's will, but all of a sudden you get hit by a roadblock or a Mack truck or something, at least you'll know that it's still God's will. You're just something's attacking you. Too many Christians think storms meant they've done something wrong, but obedience doesn't exempt you from struggle. In fact, sometimes it puts you directly in the storm so God can show you something. The boat represents comfort. It's safe, it's known, it's structured. But Jesus wasn't in the boat, he was walking on the water. Everybody seems to think, for some reason, remember the old bumper stickers, next time you think you're perfect, try walking on water? So that has been recently used as a symbol of being perfect, and that's not what it was about. It was about faith. People that they kind of know the Bible, but they don't, and they misquote the Bible with things like money's the root of all evil. No, that's not what it says. And that's the kind of people who do that. We got to constantly tell them, hey, if you read the Bible, you'll find out that the love of money is the roots of all kinds of evil. It's not that money is the root of all evil. So Jesus walks on what we fear. That was a hard title to think of how to put that. Jesus approaches the waves. What scares them is he walks on them. The waves didn't bother him. They didn't trouble him. He's like, ha, I own you. So in Psalms 56, 3-4, it says, when I'm afraid, I trust you. And Isaiah 26:3 says, peace doesn't come from calm waters. It comes from a steadfast heart. Jesus doesn't always calm the storm first. Sometimes he joins you in it. And I think I should actually, I don't know. I was afraid it'd cause some struggle if I said every time he joins you in it. Someone will say, are you sure every time? So, yeah. But I was a little worried that someone might, get confrontational about that. Are you sure every time? Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure, but I can't prove it. So biblical examples of trusting Jesus or God, whichever way, because we're doing the Old Testament too. God tells Abraham to leave his homeland without knowing where he's going. Later, God asked him to sacrifice his promised son Isaac. Later, I just read that. Abraham trusted God's plan over his own understanding, and that's in Hebrews 11:17-19. Faith means moving even when you don't know where God is leading you. So that is a good thing. I mean, if you think about it, if they asked you to sacrifice your child to God, you'd be like, no, I cannot. There's no way I could physically do that. Plus, I go to jail. But Abraham said, your will. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. How many people can say that? So in Daniel 3, trusted God even when faced with death by fire. Even if he does not deliver us, we will not bow. True faith trusts God for deliverance, but remains faithful regardless of outcome. That's another thing. And I struggle with that at work. We had a Cheeto calamity over here. Anyways, they even if God doesn't save you from it, it talks about that we got to die for our faith, is what it basically says. Does that mean do it recklessly? No, absolutely not. But if it comes to either denying Jesus or death, we have no choice. And that's what they chose. The woman with the issue of blood. She pushes through the crowd just to touch a hem of Jesus' garment. She knew that if she touched it, she would be healed. It was in her mind. Her trust in Jesus' power made her whole. Sometimes faith means reaching when everything says give up. The centurion. You guys remember this one? This one here actually isn't talked about even enough in the churches I've noticed. I hardly ever hear about this. When he says, just say the word, and my servant will be healed. And Jesus said this was a greater faith than he'd seen in all of Israel. Trusting Jesus doesn't require touch. Sometimes it's enough to trust his word. That guy didn't know Jesus. He didn't know the Bible. Another example of that is the man on the cross. He didn't know Jesus. He heard of Jesus. He knew that he was innocent, but he didn't know the Bible. Well, I don't know. Was he Jewish? Anyways, he trusted God at that moment. We don't know a lot about the guy on the cross, do we? And Peter stepped out on the word. When Jesus said, Lord, or when Peter said, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. And Jesus just said one word, come. He didn't say, come out and I'll protect you. He didn't say, come out and you won't sink. He just said, come. And that was enough. Peter didn't have little floaties. Could you see him out there, floaties? hang on, God, I got to put on my vest here. No, he didn't even get a weather update. He just stepped out on one word from Jesus. True faith doesn't need all the details. It just needs a direction. And as long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on water. The minute he looked away, he found out that he needed a flotation device. He needed those water wings. And I just repeated myself because I quoted Matthew there. So he didn't jump out, though. He didn't do it impulsively. He actually waited for Jesus to give him a command. How many people go out and do something, think they're doing God's work without waiting for God to tell them to do it? I think we've all done that. Yeah. And then when we fail on it, we blame God. And when God's like, I didn't tell you to do that. You're going on your own. You're doing your own thing. Remember those guys that said, but Jesus, we chased out demons in your name. We did this, we did that. And he goes, depart from me, I never knew you. He did not tell them to do that. They were working on their own, and they were trusting in themselves and not in Christ. So faith comes from what is heard, and what is heard comes through the word of Christ. We live by faith, not by sight. We don't need to see how it ends. You need to trust the person that said, come. The third person. Distraction makes you think. Yes, it does. And I'm constantly distracted. Ask her. She's like, you need medication. I can't have a sentence or even complete a sentence when I'm talking to you. And that's because, squirrel. So Peter walked until he focused on the storm. In Hebrews 11:1, it said, faith is the assurance of all things not seen. The woman with the issue of blood in Mark 25:34 said she had every reason to give up, but she pressed on through in trust. Even when your trust breaks down, Jesus doesn't. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand. And when you're sinking, that's what he'll do. And the other side of trust is worship. When the storm calmed, the disciples worshiped. Why did they wait? Welcome to human nature. Not after feeding the 5,000, which was a miracle. I wish I could go somewhere with a couple of crackers and a little chunk of beef and then go and feed myself for the next 6 months. That'd be great. But after Peter walked on water and Jesus saved him, that's when they took notice. This was a real miracle, people. Your story of trust in Jesus becomes someone else's reason to worship him. That happens. We got lots of stories about that. MercyMe. They talk about all the time about stuff that the troubles they had. They had a lot of troubles at the beginning. The band did, and they were all overcome. The lead singer had a temper, really bad one, got them in trouble, but they persevered through the faith of Christ and they overcome. Look at them now. We worship with them now over their own struggles. Like I can only imagine what a struggle for them. So in Matthew 14:22 to 24, the disciples obeyed Jesus and still ended up in the storm. Trusting God doesn't mean we avoid storms. It means we're not alone in them. And I left the word add in there. Paul in prison, Acts 16, and in Philippians, it says still trusting, still praising, still used by God. And that was when he was in prison. That's the worst. They're prison. They don't have room service. They don't have bathrooms. I don't even know if they had buckets back then. I don't know what they did. But you can be in the middle of God's will and still be in the middle of a storm. That's important to know. So what boat are you in? What's keeping you from stepping out? I have this problem at work all the time. There's lots of opportunities. People come in and say, why is God doing this to me? And I'm like, well, God's not doing it. And I can sit down and explain to them that fact. But I get in trouble at work. Unless the nurse happens to be a Christian, then they won't mind. But is it that? Is it fear of failure? Is it fear of judgment? Or some people, it's a need of control. They need to have control. And we're not in control. Control is an illusion. It is. We're never in control. We like to think we are. Even when I'm driving the car, I think I'm in control. Guess what? Somebody might hit me. But remembering Abraham, he left everything behind. He didn't know where he was going. They just said, basically, pick up your mat and walk, which we talked about last night. So he trusted God before he had the full picture. Trust means saying yes before you see the outcome. And call to faith. I think that's the last part of mine. Lord, save me is still the right prayer when you're thinking. Step out in faith, even if your knees are shaking. Jesus is still calling. Come. Stepping up here is kind of nerve-wracking. It's something that we don't, a lot of us cannot do. I used to not be able to do it. I went through cycles where I could and I couldn't. So step out. If you think you have a message for us up here, Saturdays, we still have open days. We have like open mics. We come up here. Yes. Yes, she's a scheduler. So talk to my wife. She's in control. Sort of. I'm telling her that so I stay safe.
Janine volunteered.
Oh, did she?
All right.
Yep, that was it. That's the end of my sermon. That's what I got right now. Luckily, it's a short one. Look at that.